So we've mentioned that there's a very strong historical record that seems to support the idea that democracies don't fight with one another. And this is famously seen as one of the most striking empirical consistencies in the study of international politics. That being said, there are some cases that some will see as negative cases, that is, contradictory cases. Others will see as problematical cases, and still others will say, it's not such a big deal. But I will think of these as difficult cases for the empirical generalization that democracies never fight one another. Because what these appear to be is wars between democracies. And the three cases there are Germany's role in World War I, Finland's role in World War II, and the U.S. Civil War. So let's take each of them one at a time. So Germany in World War I. Germany, of course, was one of the major antagonists in World War I. It was one of the major players in one of the most important wars in history. So if Germany, and of course it was fighting against several other democracies, fighting against the United States, sort of the paragon of democracy at that point, and the United Kingdom, another paragon of democracy, and France. So if Germany in World War I is a democracy, then one of the most important cases in history, World War I, is a democratic war. In Michael Doyle's 1986 article, in which he really launches the modern study of the democratic peace, his definition, by his definition, Germany would count as a democracy, and Doyle himself then has to go into some considerable explanation as to why he says, yes, it fits my definition of a democracy, but it really wasn't. So it seems like he's kind of not being completely consistent. Woodrow Wilson, who was a big believer in spreading democracy, right? His notion was World War I, the goal was to make the world safe for democracy. Wilson clearly considered Germany at the time to be a democracy. And as I already said, if Germany's a democracy, then you've got some real problems. Now, there's a set of arguments that say when you look at Germany in World War I closely, it really wasn't so democratic. In particular, the military in World War I. Let's go back here. The German military, people argue, was essentially independent of political authority at that time, and therefore an important characteristic of a democracy, namely civilian control of the military, didn't exist. There's also a lot of argument that the German executive government, and of course Germany still technically had a Kaiser, Germany was a constitutional monarchy, that the monarchy was strong enough that the German parliament, which was elected democratically, wasn't really strong enough to count Germany as a democracy. So that's the nature of it. Is Germany looks like a democracy in World War I. It's got democratic institutions. How deeply do we need to dig in order to say it's not? So Germany in World War I is a really important case. Finland in World War II is a slightly different kind of case, because there's absolutely no doubt, nobody disputes that Finland, prior to the outbreak of World War II, was a democracy. And there's equally no dispute that Finland officially was at war with the United States, Britain, and France during World War II. And the historical reasons for that I've summarized on the slide. The Soviet Union, as it saw World War II coming after the Nazi-Soviet Pact of 1939, in order to give it more of a buffer, in particular to protect Leningrad, or what's today St. Petersburg, from attack, it expanded into Finland. And so the Soviet Union and Finland went to war in late 1939, really 2 years before, or a year and a half before Germany and the Soviet Union went to war. Because Finland was then at war with the Soviet Union, when Germany attacked the Soviet Union, Finland said, okay, we're at war with the Soviet Union, you're at the war with the Soviet Union, you're big, they're big, we're small, we'll align with you. Because of its alliance with Germany, Finland found itself technically, again in the sense of declarations of war, at war with the U.S., France, and the United Kingdom. Now, how important is this? Advocates of the democratic peace theory are going to say, yes, technically Finland was at war with these countries, but it really didn't matter. Finnish troops never went to war against, or never fought against American troops, French troops, or British troops. It was simply a legal status, state that was a result of this invasion by the Soviet Union. In a sense, Finland was simply at war with one of the U.S. allies. one of France's allies, one of the UK's allies. And more broadly, there's an argument that, again, substantively, it just seems pretty minor, right? Finland was minor in World War II, and again, it didn't actually fight these big democracies. Third case that's a different sort of case altogether is the U.S. Civil War. And there's a couple different ways of thinking about the U.S. Civil War as a problem for the democratic peace, right? Which is, if the United States was a democracy, and if democracy is supposed to prevent war, then you really ought not to have a democracy throw a civil war in which 600,000 people out of a fairly small population in the 1860s gets killed. So that's one version of it. One version is, in democracies, there shouldn't be any such thing as civil war if democracy prevents it. It's a slightly different version of it that says these are two democratic states. You've got the Confederate States of America after it secedes, the United States of America, both are democracies, and they fight this big war. Democratic peace theorists generally respond in two different ways. One is to say, look, the Confederacy really wasn't all that democratic. After all, it was a slaveholding society. And another point is simply going to be, it's a civil war. It doesn't count. It's not even what we're talking about. It's a completely different kind of thing. So big questions about this. One of the big questions is democratic peace theory's treatment of the evidence consistent, or does it have to kind of cook the evidence a little bit in order to get to this idea that democracies never fight one another? I think a slightly maybe more productive way to ask the question is, how much damage do these cases do to the generalization? And I've got sort of a range of possible answers there. One is, they're kind of weird cases. They don't really have any impact. Another one is to say, these are important counterexamples that should at least make us think about the extent and how definitive this is. And then there's others that are going to say that they're definitive evidence, that one or more of these cases is definitive evidence that says the theory doesn't hold water. A different way of framing the question still is, okay, supposing we admit one or more of these cases really is a counterexample. What does that mean? Does it mean that we change our generalization from saying democracies never go to war with one another to say that they very rarely go to war with one another? And if we say it that way, does that make us say, well, rather than this idea that war between democracies is impossible, we're simply going to say it's really unlikely? Or are we going to respond in some different way altogether? So again, the theoretical claims made about the democratic peace are very tightly linked to this look at the historical evidence, as well as any claims in political science should be. The question is exactly then, what does the historical record show? And there's, unsurprisingly, a lot of disagreement about that, but it makes for a great fun to argue with your friends about.